All right. Well, Matt Lucas, brother, I appreciate you taking the time to join me today. Matt is the CEO of Our Daily Bread Ministries, and I'm super excited to have you on the show today, brother. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to
Thank
be here,
you.
Jason.
Let's get started like I always do. Tell me about your career background and maybe go back to university, college, just after high school, and run us through what the Lord did to get you to leading that great organization that I think many of us, if not all of us, are familiar with.
Well, it's definitely one that was unplanned. Even though I was a young boy, I had dreams of one day being a CEO. I can remember that I was very entrepreneurial. But by the time I was in high school and early college, I decided I wanted to be a teacher, and I was really interested in English. And so I did my undergraduate and my master's and my doctorate all in English
Wow.
literature, and went right through that, back to back to back. Was done by I was 26, and was thinking about going and teaching at a college or university, particularly a small Christian university. My dream was to be in the classroom for 50 years and teaching students. Before I ended up there, I taught high school for a few years. I completed my coursework by 26. I had to take a couple more years to finish up my dissertation. So I did that. I was in teaching high school and really loved it, and really felt like, whether it's high school or college, wanted to do that. Was invited back about 10 years after graduating from my alma mater to my alma mater, and was teaching. Was actually asked to lead right off the bat is in an administrative position, and I would do a little bit of teaching, but it wouldn't be in English literature. So I said yes, because I thought this would be a way back to the classroom, and did that, and started out as a director of the first graduate program at Corbin University. And from there out, it was just this long process of getting further and further away from the classroom, and never being able to get back.
And
you
said it was Corbin University? That's where you got your education as well?
Yeah, it's in Salem, Oregon. It's a small Christian liberal arts school, similar to Cornerstone, which I believe that you're familiar
that's
with.
where I got my MBA from Cornerstone. Love that school.
Yeah, so both schools are sister schools in the sense they're related to the same denomination, at least affiliated in the background. So I was aware at Cornerstone when I thought about it one time, going to Cornerstone in my undergraduate years, and before I started. So
you were doing administrative leadership at Corbin, and then then what happened? Why did you get away from? Did you go from there to Our Daily Bread?
Yeah, so it was interesting from there. I'm a director. I'm 32 years old, and I'm serving as a director, and I've never led in a formal role, and I had to start a program from scratch in 3 months. Had to hire people, had to lead faculty, and I'm just making this up as I go, trying to figure it out. Thankfully, I had a really good mentor. My boss, the dean of education, was a phenomenal leader, strong woman, and really was good. She had raised sons, and she was really good at mentoring young men, just natural at it. And so she spent a lot of time encouraging me. And so from there, 2 years later, she stepped away into the provost role at the university and suggested I take on the dean role that she vacated. And my first response was, no, I want to go to the classroom. But 6 months later, I'm like, okay, I'm doing the job as the interim dean. I might as well take the title. So I do that for 2 years. And she leaves to go to another university and vacates the provost position. And she suggested to my future president, or my current president, but my future boss, that, hey, you should look at Matt Lucas. And I was actually on my way to Indonesia to go be a dean in liberal arts and teach English. Like I'm going to Indonesia to go back to the classroom and be a dean. And anyway, it was a long story how it all worked out. I'm becoming provost. So I'm 36 years old. I'm a provost. I have no desire to, this was not my trajectory. But yeah, I think other people saw some leadership skills, administrative skills in me. And I just started discovering that it just was natural. So from there, from provost to executive vice president. From executive vice president, I left there and went on to Indiana Wesleyan University, where I was chancellor there. Indiana Wesleyan is the largest Christian school in the CCCU, the Coalition of Christian Colleges and Universities. The Coalition Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. And Yeah, did that for 5 years and then was headhunted from there into this role, which I was not, I was not looking. At one time, I thought I might leave Christian higher education and go to a nonprofit position, but was not looking for this, and am surprised, as probably as surprised as the next person that I'm in this role. Yeah, it's
How
just
long
not
ago was that,
very
Matt?
surprised. Yeah, so March 1st of 2022 is when I started. So it was about 2.5
Okay.
years for the taping of this. I've been in this role, and it's been a good fit. I can really see and look back in my life how God used this or prepared me for this role. When I was a young man, um, before I was still in college, I had aspirations to write devotionals and to do um, curriculum like that. They weren't very good. Um, but over the years, I kept doing that. I'd write devotionals, write things like that throughout. And by the time I was at Indiana Wesleyan University, I was doing that on a regular basis in my role
Yeah.
for the school, for the university, for my employees. And I told my wife I would love to be in a place where I could do this. Is a core part of my job. It's interesting. On here, I do write for our devotional material, but I don't do it
Yeah.
as much as I would like to do it. The job doesn't give me the freedom to do that kind of reflection and writing, but I do get the opportunity. It's kind of hard to say no to the president when he says he's going to write for our content. And they're gracious. They want me to, but you kind of can say, hey,
I'm gonna take
CEO,
this
I'd
one.
like to do that.
So I think that most people, if not everyone listening, is familiar with Our Daily Bread, but because we have it in our church's material that's handed out, can you talk though a little bit about the organization? I mean, there's a whole organization, so size, structure. I'm very interested in what that looks like.
Yeah, I think most people. Yeah, I think a lot of people are familiar with us because of our devotion. We're much bigger than that. We're really a Bible engagement ministry. We have 700 employees around the world. We have 32 offices, work in about 58 languages, over 150 countries. So we're about Bible engagements in all forms, across all channels, across all media. So we got a media group. We got a multimedia audiovisual group that does feature-length films. We do content curriculum for churches. We do the devotional. We do social media, digital. You can just go on and on. So we got a book publishing house. We do about $5 million, $5.5 million in revenue of that a year. And that's just for the publishing and just printing of books that we sell. So we're about an $80 million total ministry around the world. So people are always surprised that we're much bigger than we are and much more complex. So when we have offices around the world, more people work outside the United States than inside the United States.
That was one thing I was going to ask, was how many work like there. Because you're located, you sit around in Grand Rapids, in that location where you're at?
Yeah, so our office here, we have about 275, 280 employees here in Grand Rapids. The rest are outside. I do a lot of travel, and if I'm not traveling, I'm on Zoom or working with teams across the world. And so in addition to just leading it's a mid-size ministry. Actually, we're probably one of the larger ministries as far as comparing ourselves to other, as far as the size and scope to other ministries. But the complexity of actually having employees on the ground doing the work, writing content, doing Bible engagement ministries around the world in various contexts. Yeah, it creates for a lot of opportunities for engaging people and working through challenges. Usually there's some problem somewhere in the world that's creating an issue for our teams that we have to work through, whether it's geopolitical, economic, or just, natural disasters. We had an office in Jamaica got hit by the earthquake, flooding in Taiwan affected our Taiwanese office. Myanmar with the civil unrest is affecting right now our Ukrainian office. We're actually starting to shut that down because we just can't continue to work there, and pivoting towards probably Romania or somewhere else. So there's always something somewhere that's creating additional challenges for the work we do.
Yeah, that I can imagine. Yeah, that is complex. What is the kind of average size of offices that are in those areas? Half a dozen people or 2 or 3 people? Like, what's that look like in those areas?
Yeah, so some of our largest offices like Singapore, Indonesia, Brazil, over 40 people. Some of our smaller offices, can have 1 to 2 people.
Yeah.
Probably the average size is about 10 to 12. So yeah, Australia has got close to 19. Like so, yeah, the United Kingdom, a little over 20. So each office is unique
Yep.
and engages um, with with their audience and with the work that they're doing on the ground, the churches, a little bit differently. And yeah, I mean, just depending on the size, you can do certain things.
Right.
But in a lot of ways, there's a replication of the ministry, even on a small team like Sri Lanka that has 4 people, 5 people. They're doing in microcosm what we're doing here in Grand Rapids, and a lot of it's translation or contextualization on their end. But they also do a lot of writing and content that's just specific to the Sri Lankan office, working with volunteers and churches.
Well, I know that's surprising to me. I mean, you just like you said, you see the material, you're familiar with it, but don't know the business behind it, and that is pretty complex, especially being spread out around the world like that. Tell us a little bit about your family, Matt. What's that situation look like?
Yeah, so my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have 6 girls. 2 of them are adopted. We have 3 grandchildren. Our oldest daughter is adopted into the family when she was a teenager. So so she came in when we still had little girls. So I'm not that old. But
I understand that.
yeah, it's been great having her. She actually was one of my high school students, my first year teaching. So she was a couch surfer. I coached soccer, so she actually married one of my soccer players, captained the soccer team. So I've known them since they were 14
Nice.
and foolish. And then we have another daughter we adopted from Namibia. She brought her into our family when she came here to the States, and she didn't have anywhere to go, so we just brought her into our family. And then we have another 20. So she's 27 or about to turn 27. We got another 27-year-old that's our biological daughter, and then a 24-year-old, and then identical twin girls who are 20, about to turn 21. So,
Nice.
yeah. And then like three. I don't want to leave our grandkids out. So we've got a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a little 8-year-old. So, but they're in Oregon, so I don't do the same.
Oh, okay. Our grandkids are the greatest. We've got 2 that are 5 and 1, and it's what a joy.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're local, so we can see them quite a bit. That's
great.
huge blessing for sure. What about your faith, Matt? Like, what's your faith background? How'd you come to know the Lord? Maybe denominational background. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my parents were led to the Lord by Southern Baptist missionaries. We were my dad was in the military stationed in Taiwan, and Southern Baptist missionaries led first my mom and then him to the Lord. And so, like any Southern Baptist, we were they were taught as soon as you get to a new service station, the first thing you do is look for a Southern Baptist church.
Yeah.
Usually First Baptist Church of wherever we lived. So as we moved around the world, we would go there. My parents were really, they were intentional about raising us up in a Christian home, and so I was fortunate of that. And but it wasn't until so I grew up Baptist. I would have said Southern Baptist, but by the time I went to as in high school, we were living in the Northwest, the United States, and there Southern Baptist. There's not a lot of Southern Baptists in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah. And so we ended up going to a church that's actually, as I was mentioning to you earlier, that's associated with the General Association of Regular Baptists, which are behind both Cornerstone and Corbin University. Okay. So they just happened to be at the church in our neighborhood, in our area. Parents liked the church, so we went there. Went off to university, which, again, Corbin, and wanted to go to a Christian university, and that's where I met my wife. She was also raised. She wasn't raised Baptist, but raised in a small village missions church. Lives in a very rural area of Oregon, but really grounded in her faith. And we did that. We raised our girls in a Baptistic churches. I've really been fortunate. I was able to serve as an elder and Sunday school director and small group leader, men's ministry leader. So I've been involved in a number of areas with the church, led youth group for a number of years. it's been interesting the last couple of years because of our moving. We're still getting acclimated. I think we've landed at a church. It's non-denominational here in town, but still trying to figure out what it looks like to be engaged in church while doing full-time ministry. And
Yeah.
yeah, I travel a lot around the world, and so as I travel, how do I balance that and yeah, the demands of work?
Yeah. Yeah. Serving in ministry. And yeah, I found we made one major move in our life, and it wasn't a long ways away, but far enough where we had to find a new church. And that was the biggest challenge for us. That was out of everything. We were pretty deeply grounded in the church our kids grew up in, and we moved when they were our two oldest were teenagers. And
Yeah.
that's huge. That's a big
Yeah,
challenge.
I think a lot of people, I think for us, we underestimated that challenge. The church in Oregon was our church family at such a
Yeah.
deep level.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you leave, and you long for what that community was like. Um, yeah, and you come into new communities where you're not known and people have grown up, and you're coming in at a
Yep.
different stage of your life. It
Yep.
is more difficult. So,
Yep.
but yeah, it's been a learning experience. I mean, because of that, my wife particularly has gravitated more towards newer people coming into the church and international people, because
Yeah.
we've done a lot of work internationally over the years that we've been either my job or just in our own ministry, personal ministry, and so that's kind of been where we found started to create that community. But yeah, it's very different than what we had in Oregon.
Yeah. No, I think the same thing. We underestimated the impact it would have on ourselves and our kids, but the Lord grew us in a lot of ways through that. Hey, topic of leadership, Matt. When you think about leadership and your own emphasis, or I guess your own, core principles, what are those? What are the core things that you go back to as a leader?
Yeah, you're been doing this now for over 20 years in leadership roles, and I think probably the best way I've tried to, I got a lot of things that I kind of, hooks and things that I grab as I'm leading, but I always come back to my definition of leadership that I use, which is to serve and shepherd a team so they can accomplish more than they think possible for a better future. And I think there's some key aspects of that. So one is serving and shepherding. I like to talk about both of those, partly because I'm wired pastorally.
Mhm.
People have called that out of my life. I will not be surprised at some point in my life in the future that I don't end up pastoring full time or in some way in a church. But yeah, I like that kind of shepherding aspect of caring for people and really helping nurture and encourage them, call out the best in them, and then of course serving. And doing that in a way that is about them. And then I like to talk a lot about team. You know, my greatest success is really the success of the team.
Yeah.
When they do great things, I love to see it. I love to celebrate that. I love it to be about them. And really, I feel great when, I'm in the background and I can point to the work that they've done and say, hey, they've been phenomenal, and point to that. And I think it's really important to realize that team really helps you accomplish more than you think possible. I always tell my team, if you're not asking to do something more than you think possible, then why do they need you?
Yeah.
Right? What people need, whoever that is someone to come in and say, hey, we can do what we don't think is possible right now. And then it has to be for a better future,
Yeah.
right? Because you can lead in any different direction you want to, but if it's not pointing to a better future, and for us as followers of Jesus, right? That better future is both a life transformation in Christ, but also one that actually impacts the kingdom.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, I came up with this about 8 or 9 years ago. I was trying to think about when I think about leadership, what are the core things, and I've kind of baked that together. And yeah, I go back to that a lot. I just ask myself, hey, how am I doing on that? Where's that going? And then as I talk with my team, okay, this is what we're trying to do. This is how I'm trying to lead us. Then as you lead your team, you can come up with your own definition. But the goal is at some point the goal is to get that team to come together and to do something more than they thought possible, or they don't need you. Get somebody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. And do you think, Matt, as you develop that vision, one of the things I've learned, I'm just curious on your thoughts on this. I've had to learn this, is soliciting the input of the team in that kind of that vision development, right? And not just, hey, I'm going to come as a leader and I have this totally formed, developed vision. This is what I need you to help me to get to, type of thing, versus, what does better look like for whatever the organization is. I work in for-profit, you work in nonprofit, but as you said, we as leaders, we have to be moving forward to improve. It's like in our personal walk with Christ, the sanctification that never stops. What have you learned through that, or what's your thoughts on, how do you hone and develop that vision with your
that's a
team?
good question, Jason, because I thought about that. I've given that a lot of thought, especially in this new role. And I look back in my younger years and, being young, being thrust into leadership, I was leading people that I was the youngest faculty member, and I was asked to be the provost.
Yeah, you're in charge.
So I'm like, so there's a sense of insecurity and trying to, hey, I know what I'm doing. And, looking back, I had ideas and I had a vision for what that looked like, but I really felt like I had to do that. Even though I knew all the right language, I had read the books, I was reading the books. It's hard to kind of really put yourself at a very, humble yourself, lower your ego, and really be about the team. So while that definition probably that I just gave was, leading a team so they can accomplish more than they thought possible. Like I would say that I could maybe think that, but I really wasn't practicing that on a real heart level. So I could see when my heart was like, oh, I really want to strive here. I want to people know that I'm doing this. I'm feeling insecure. Some of that comes with age. I grew up and just started realizing, hey, just getting older is, some wisdom. But then really the Lord just doing the work in my life and just saying, and really listening to where my heart really was and where, as much as I could know my heart and recognizing that I don't fully know my heart and just being sensitive to that and say, okay, you know what, I do sometimes want to strive out in front, and how do I lower that? So now in this role, I'm 52, about to turn 53. And there's this balance, and you probably experienced it yourself. There are moments when I have to lead, and if I don't, there's a vacuum, and I'm doing a disservice to the team, and I'm doing disservice to my role, and this is what God's called me to. Conversely, there are times when, hey, I need to step back and let others lead. And the way I've kind of worked through that is just really trying to walk in step with the Lord, listening to what the Holy Spirit might be saying in that moment, and sometimes it's exhausting. So I'm really just trying to listen in that moment. And so I talk about the team. I talk about this a lot. Here's another principle I talk about, which is the definition of humility, or that what humility looks like is humility is being the right size for the situation at the right time. Because sometimes you need to be bigger and sometimes you need to be smaller. And humility coupled with wisdom allows you to know where that is. So if I'm too small for a situation, where that calls me to be bigger, to use my talents, my gifts, then I'm not doing it well. Conversely, if I'm too big, when the situations should be much smaller. So I think that's probably been the lesson that I've constantly asked myself, okay, Matt, how big do I need to be here? Sometimes it's listening to the team. Sometimes it's listening to the Lord and saying, okay, I've got to step up here, or no, I probably should.
I like that a lot. I hadn't heard that said that way. But I found that when, there's good momentum on my team and they're working good together, moving towards that vision, I need to step out of their way and watch them, like you said, and celebrate and watch. And it is so rewarding to just step back and watch it happen, because we've put the plan in place. Everybody knows their roles. They work together. And I like that a lot. Knowing when to,
I like what you said, Jason, about stepping back. I think what really, I can't remember when that moment was. It was late in my time at Corbin when I really made the transition and saying, you know what? My greatest moment of success as a leader is when I see the team winning. And I just started looking for that more and more. It's like when that's happening, And that, for me, that was counterintuitive to my ego. Kind of like I wanted to be in the limelight, and I
Yep.
just started looking. Okay, when does that happen?
Yep.
And I just started getting excited about it. So now I hunt for it. I'm constantly looking for that. And I've discovered, I mean, there's still my ego. I'll be honest. There's times I want to be recognized, and even in looking for other people's success, I can quickly turn that and corrupt that into, yeah, I'm looking for other people's success, so it can be about
Right.
my
Yep.
success. But when I'm truly, genuinely in that moment and just like, hey, they are doing awesome. I'm seeing God's given talent just manifest themselves, that they're doing something that they didn't think was possible. And I get excited about that.
Yeah.
That's when I'm in my sweet spot. And for me, then everything just I can find myself just disappearing and like,
Yeah. Right.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah.
They don't need you right now. They got
Correct.
it. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. Hey, when you were a young leader, what was something as you look back now and you really struggled with, and maybe you've already touched on a little bit, but do you still struggle with it some? What have you done to overcome it? Like, what was something as a young leader really you battled, struggled with
Yeah,
yourself?
I mean, definitely one was being thrust into the leadership the way I was. There was a sense of insecurity and inferiority and trying to figure that out. And definitely coming to terms with that was a major issue. My mentor, probably one of the things that she would say to me is that, like one of the things where guys wire me is that I can usually connect things quicker than most people in the room. It's just, it's just always been the case. I can see the dots. And because I could do that, I would quickly, and then my ego is like, I want people to know that I've connected the dots quicker than everybody else in the room.
Yep.
And really trying to not get, like, that became a major issue. So, and then that's dangerous, right? So just because you connect the dots doesn't mean you're connecting them the right way. And you might not have a full perspective on that. And so I think that's probably been an area I still battle with that at times, that I can be in a room. I've had people say that. They're just like, Matt, it's amazing how quick you can process information. And it's easy to say, oh, I'm really good at that. But there is that dark side, which is you don't connect the right dots. You don't have the full perspective. And even if you do have those things down, man, my ego can quickly corrupt that in ways that aren't healthy. So what she would counsel me to do is she said, you have to ask more questions. You've got to slow down. And I would say I'm still a work in progress on that, and really trying to say, okay, what's the right question to ask here first, rather than saying, okay, I can see this and do that. But what I find when I'm at my best in that moment is when I can ask the right questions, step back, and when I try to practice this, I don't always do it well, and pray, say, God, what is it that you're seeing here, and do I need to say something, or do I need to let that emerge from the team?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then try to be in step with that. Like that's been a challenge. And there's
that's hard.
under stress, I will definitely default to the darker side. But when I'm in the Word on a regular basis, I'm really listening to the Spirit. There's a sense of like, okay, yeah, that's when God's using me at the best, at my best potential.
Yeah, when you know in your head you have the answer, staying curious and asking questions and not just getting to that answer, to that end game. I think that curiosity piece has been something I've had to learn, is ask.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying. You said it in a few words. But
No, it's good. It's I think I relate to that too. Just be curious and ask questions, and not just because I have to jump to conclusions and they're wrong. Sometimes they're right, but too often they're wrong, and you don't let people kind of walk through the process, the thinking process. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is your spiritual disciplines. Like, what do you do on a daily, weekly basis to stay close to the Lord and keep growing, sanctification, growing in holiness? And what does that look like on a practical level for you?
Practical level. So for us, we're a Bible engagement ministry. So, when I came here, I said we have to practice. We profess.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it would be really strange that we're talking about this and then we don't do it. And as a CEO, it starts with me about what does that really look like. And fortunately, I've come into a ministry where that's already a natural part of my life. I'm always growing in that, and is able to, just continue that. Um, regular just sort of prayer. One of the things that I do those things. I don't always do it perfectly. I'm the CEO of Our Daily Bread Ministries, and there's days that I get too busy and I run out the door. Like I'll get to that later, and I don't. I don't. And I always pay for it.
Always.
I always pay for it.
It's true.
Or I might get by with it for one day. Like, okay, that wear this, but it'll come back, right? So I think really what I've been working on lately is really trying to slow myself down and still myself. And like just even today, I was just noticing before, about an hour before this, my mind was racing. I just got the phone call and just realized that I really hadn't spent time praying as much as I thought I had been praying about the very thing that we were talking about. And so really just trying to pause in the middle of that moment and just say, okay, I need to step down. I need to be quiet for 5 minutes, try to still my mind, not let it race to the next thing. So that's one. And then the other side is, I'm fortunate that I could do this, is that in a ministry like ours, I've been in a Christian ministry in leadership my entire life. I can stop a meeting and say, you know what, I think we're stuck right here. We're pausing. We're going to pray. And sometimes I don't do that with the large group. I'll just do it for myself and I'll let them keep talking. I'm just like, I need to pray. And really trying to practice. So when James says, if any lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, he'll give it to you. If I really believe that promise, then how do I actually live into that in the moment? So that kind of, I would speak to our audience like, hey, if you had that moment and you're, especially if you're in a Christian setting where you can actually do this verbally, vocally, out loud, do it. Because man, our teams will always say that, that when we do that, the Holy Spirit comes in and does things in ways that, it changes the conversation, or it gives us clarity, even if things are like, stop. Okay, we just have a sense like, hey, we need to stop here. We're going to do something different. I think that diligent, really listening day by day, practicing the presence of the Holy Spirit on a regular basis has been probably the key thing I've been keep coming back to.
Another leadership topic. Who do you follow? Who do you read? Podcasts that you listen to? Like, what are some recommendations you would have for the audience who help you stay sharp as a leader?
Yeah, if you were sitting here looking at my desk, I have a small bookshelf right next to me here of books I come back to, and behind me I got a leadership bookshelf. What's interesting, the books that are probably the most influential have actually been books that don't directly address leadership. So one of my favorites is Visions of Vocation by Steve Garber, which really talks about the idea of how do you, like, what does vocation look like? And he says basic vocation is a calling of like loving the world despite knowing it in all of its ugliness. So as I talk with leaders, at ODBM, Our Daily Bread Ministries, the longer I'm here, the more I know it, and I know how the sausage is made, and I know the weaknesses. Can I love it in spite of all that? And I think that's a way to avoid cynicism, because I think as a leader, it's easy to become cynical. So that's a key book. Another one is called The J Curve by Paul Miller. It's a great book it's a Pauline theology, very practical, in which he just talks about the shape of the gospel as a J curve, both death, burial, and resurrection. And it's a very simple idea, but Miller just really kind of elaborates on it, really goes deep on that. And in fact, last week I was talking about leadership and we were talking about change management. And I just used the J curve as a biblical principle, but I talked about that in change management. And then I talked about that from a biblical perspective, what was really going on in death, burial, and resurrection. So for me, it's been those books. Another one has been Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And that's just been a transformative book that I come back to over and over and over again, especially chapter 1. So I could go on. I would say the last one that like I said, I got about 15 of them here that, like, I just looking at the shelf, I go, oh yeah, that's the key point that I have here. But one that I would really encourage people to to really consider looking at is Dangerous Calling by Paul David Tripp, who this is written for pastors. Chapter 4, I think if you're in leadership, particularly in Christian leadership, really going deep into chapter 4, and Paul Tripp really just gets into knowing the leader's heart, and he's just got a whole list of questions. And it's good questions for me. They're good questions for my team. There's the questions that people should be asking me. In leadership, it's easy to say, "Oh, Matt's got it together. He's the CEO of our Daily Bread Ministries."
Right.
Like, I need those questions, and yeah, Tripp just does a good job. And he's really worked with a lot of pastors who's fallen and just seen ministries implode. He worked with the Mars Hill Driscoll's Church out in Seattle, and I was connected and kind of watched that at the front row seat implode. And after all that, another issue in the church I was dealing with, I read that book. And I mean, that book, chapter 4, I think it's essential for any Christian leader. Like you've got to wrestle with that book, and you got to wrestle with that with your team.
Love it.
So yeah, that would be my. But like I said, I got like 12 others that I'd love to talk about. So.
No, that's great. One of the things you mentioned that I want to go back to that I think was pretty impactful in my life, and I think I still see it impact people, is this: as people get an opportunity to take on leadership roles in ministry. So, and I think specifically local church ministry leadership, at least for me, and I've seen this happen with others, there's a rude awakening sometimes of some of the problems and sins and struggles that are happening in the church that the typical parishioner are completely unaware of, and rightfully so. And when I can remember, it was probably 20 years ago when I first was asked to serve as a deacon. So you began to see some of the broken relationships and the struggles within the church, and it can cause you to become cynical. It will challenge your faith a little bit, and that I thought all these people were just, they come to church and they're dressed up real nice and everything looks great on Sunday, and then, you start working behind the scenes, and either among the leadership team, I've seen some awful bitterness, and I'm sure you've seen and been involved in some of those horror stories, but then also just getting pulled into some of the brokenness within the church to minister to those people. And I've seen, that was, I want to say, a little bit shocking to me at first, and I've seen for other people it to be shocking. And I just want to talk about that for a minute, especially for those who maybe are going through that or are going to go through that it's, I don't want to say it's normal in a way that we should just accept it, but it's there's still sin in people's hearts, and there's still destructive things that happen even within the church. But talk a little about, I guess, your experience with that, and maybe what advice would you give someone? This is my point I want to make, or the advice I want to give is for someone who is maybe moving into or will be moving into a church leadership role, and get some of that same, they see how the sausage is made a little bit and see some of the things that they're surprised to see.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's an insightful question. And it's one that usually anybody, I've thought about this a lot, because oftentimes when people come to a Christian ministry, they're like, hey, I was working in the secular world, I want to come to a Christian ministry.
Yes.
And that's what I say.
It's going to be great. Okay, it's going to be perfect.
You're going to run into problems. And I actually say you're probably going to run into more, because on top of just the fact that we're humans, you've got the spiritual warfare additional issues. So that there's going to be probably even a heightened sense of this. This is the reason why Bonhoeffer's book, A Life Together, I wrestled with this. I'm a young guy. I'm leading a Christian university, people who know their Bible inside and out, and I'm watching people just do things that just we wouldn't teach that in the classroom, and why are we behaving this way? And so, in Life Together, what Bonhoeffer says is that the dream community is actually the thing that needs to die because the real community, so the dream or the ideal community that you might have of what this should be, that needs to die because the real community of believers and all their warts and ugliness is actually part of your sanctification process.
Yeah.
So the more I just really really just really sit underneath the weight of that, which also means my brokenness
Yeah.
is actually part of other people's sanctification. So there's that piece of really wrestling with that. And then there's this other side of also recognizing, well, what needs to change in me? It's easy for me to identify all the other things, but what really needs to change in me? And sometimes it's just long suffering and dealing with people's brokenness, because you like to just say, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So then there's that piece. So I always ask myself before I want to solve anything that I see is like, God, what in me has to change? And that I find that usually takes longer than 1 minute or 1 day. Like I have to really sit with that for a while. And then lastly, and I was just talking with a pastor right before this, and we were just, we're unrelated to this, but he said something that I think is really true. It's like, and then there's a moment when you have to do what Jesus is calling you to do. It's to step into a difficult conversation, even if it's going to blow up. And I think it's those three pieces: the depth of the dream community and living with the real community, recognizing how I contribute to that, but then also really listening to the Lord and saying, okay, when do I need to say something? And not measuring saying something if it goes well, right? I mean, actually today's devotional in Our Daily Bread was about Daniel, and the men around him in Daniel chapter 6 could find nothing wrong with him, and they searched and searched. And so what did they do? So they manufactured a new law so they can catch him praying to his God. Like, you could be doing everything right.
Yeah. Yep.
And still find yourself in a situation where you're going to be tested and tried, because we live in a fallen world. And we sometimes as Christians go, well, if I do the right thing, it should be easy.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it might actually get harder.
Well, you look at
Right?
like Jesus lived a perfect life that did not end well for him, right? They
Correct.
hated him.
Yeah.
And
So I think it's those three pieces.
Good.
Dream community has to die. You have to be able to say, hey, what's wrong with myself? But then you have to ask yourself, hey, I might have to say and do something that's really hard, and it might get worse. But am I going to be willing to do it? But I don't think you can. I think the problem is if you start with that third point, you've got a problem.
Yep.
You've got to start with, hey, what has to die?
Yeah.
What has to change in me? And then you're at a place where God probably is able to use you to say, okay, now you might be actually seeing enough of this clearly to be able to say something that's constructive to the situation.
I love that. No, I actually was praying about that this morning in a relationship that I have, that, Lord, let me have the wisdom to say what needs to be said. If it needs to be said, you direct me what to say, when to say, and even if that means it's gonna blow up, if you will, but also help me to keep my mouth shut. And if it's something I have to look inward on. So I'm gonna get that book. I'm gonna download that book to my Kindle. I've read Bonhoeffer before. I've not read that book, but everything I've read that he's written is really very, very insightful.
What's great about that book, I mean, it's probably the shortest book he's written.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's quick, especially and again, I think the first chapter is the best chapter. I think the other stuff, I don't find it as helpful, but chapter 1, Life
Good.
Together, man, it's good.
Awesome. Hey, Matt, if you had somebody who reached out to you that young, let's say someone who's young in their career and the first time they're going to get to be a leader, and they're like, hey, Matt, if I buy you a cup of coffee, can we meet and just give me some advice? Generic advice on first time leadership. I'm get to be a supervisor or manager of a team. What advice would you give to somebody in that situation?
Yeah, that's kind of hard because each situation is different, but you're saying general. I think the thing that I come back to is what I look for in a young leader is I always look for how teachable they are. And so I think the questions I would ask is like, how teachable are you really? I mean, if you're going to have to lead people, like you're going to have to start leading yourself first, and that leading yourself first is realizing you don't have all the answers. And so how teachable are you? Because you're going to make the mistake. You're going to blow it in front of your team. And I've watched leaders, and I've been guilty of it, doubling down because you can't lose face. But if you can really assess the teachability of your own heart and be teachable, because the real moment of leadership, I believe, is when you blow it and you let everybody know that you've blown it,
Yeah.
and you don't say, I'm sorry. You say, I need your forgiveness. Please forgive me because I have wronged you. I have done what I shouldn't have done. I'm not talking about a mistake. I mean, that's different. Those, I mean, but you just will. You're gonna sin. You're going to fall short. You're gonna do your team wrong. And I think that teachability allows you to just to say, hey, I need your forgiveness because I have wronged you. It's awkward. I've had to do that a couple times, even here. It's awkward. No one likes it. I don't like it. And then everybody wants to say, oh, it's okay, because you're the leader. But when I told people, no, I have to stay in and say, no, it's not okay. I have wronged you, and I'm asking you to forgive me because what I did doesn't line up with Scripture, and it hurt you.
Yeah.
I think that moment, I think for me, that's the defining moment of. I watch for that in a leader when they do some version of that. I think. That's when, at least in a Christian setting, that's when leadership starts going to a different level because you've been able to take yourself off that pedestal.
Yeah, that's huge. That level of humility and teachability. That's good. I appreciate it.
Again, I don't always get that right.
No,
so
I'm
I don't
with
want
you.
to put myself
I'm
on
with
a
you.
pedestal there, but
I had to do that today. Yeah. I had to go back and apologize for an overreaction I had in a meeting, and So, I know it's tough. You know you're wrong, but the Lord was working on me, and He was. Of course, He's right. There's some conviction there, so to go back and make that apology. I like that though, to go and say, "Hey, I need your forgiveness." That's a little deeper level. Two other questions for you before we wrap up. One is, do you have somebody, and you don't have to answer on the spot, but if you know, that's great. You have somebody you'd like to see on the podcast, be a good fit, someone who's had a few decades of leadership under their belt like yourself and that you respect as a leader in profit or nonprofit. Anybody you can think of?
Yeah, there is someone. He's been a mentor for a number of years. His name's Judge Vance Day. He's a retired judge. Nice. He lost his judgeship because he would not marry homosexual couples and paid a high price in Oregon for doing that. And I watched him walk through that. So I would love to introduce you to him. He's had a lot of leadership positions before, went through the fire, had leadership positions since then, and is a giant of the faith as far as I'm concerned, as I watched him do that. So I'd be happy to connect you with him. He would be a great
I would appreciate that. That'd be great. And then, so thank you. And then, what do you hope people remember about you, Matt, when your full-time workplace journey is done? What do you hope, as they think about having interacted with you, worked for you, what do you hope they'll remember?
I think going back to my definition, I'd hope that they remember that, hey, he helped become better. He made the ministry better. He made us better as a team, and that they would remember more about the stories about how the team really was functioning well, and not necessarily about me.
I like that.
I think if you can, because then I would say, hey, they don't need me anymore.
Yeah.
So
I
think every single leader, your real job is to get to the point where you're just not needed.
That's good. I think back when I've had the best teams that I was a part of, led or was a part of, and there's such rewarding times. You wake up in the morning ready to go to work. Even if you're facing some strong challenges, you're like, that's all right. I've got a great team of people, and we're going to get through this together. Versus, all these constant infighting and battling and division. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow you, get a hold of you, how do they do that with you and or the ministry? You mentioned there's more than just the devotionals that get left on the, by the church bulletin every week. So how can people keep track of you, get a hold of you, and Our Daily Bread also?
Well, so definitely, reach out, matt.lucas@odb.org. It's an email. I don't do a lot of social media platforms, but I do use LinkedIn a lot
Yeah.
and heavily. Um, and so, yeah, that's probably the place. I tend to probably easiest to find me if you can't remember the email. Just look Matt Lucas in Our Daily Bread Ministries, and I will show up and would love to
Yeah.
connect. And I use that as my primary way to engage people inside and outside the ministry.
Yeah. And I'll link to that too in the show notes so people can go right to your LinkedIn page as well. And I'm guessing just Our Daily Bread Ministries, you can start there and find out all the different resources that you guys are putting out, right?
Yeah, I'm glad to do that. And yeah, it'd be wonderful.
Good. Well, good. Well, thank you, brother. I know you're busy. I really, again, appreciate your time. I can't wait to get this out there and have people learn about what the Lord's done in and through you, and a little more about Our Daily Bread. Like I said, it's such a prolific ministry in churches, at least in Protestant churches. I know I've known about for decades, so it's really neat to learn more about it and about you. So thank you.